I've been looking for this book, Tropical Architecture in the Dry and Humid Zones by Maxwell and Jane Drew, architects who practiced in the tropical zones during their time. They experimented, they were proficient in the design of tropical buildings, did a lot of um, buildings in Nigeria, Ghana, and various other countries. They traveled around, tested their methods, found out what worked, and they put together some books on what exactly architecture, tropical architecture is, and how you know to really like design for the tropics. And this is a later book. They did one before, uh, but this is one that I've been looking for quite some time. Which and so I managed to get my hands on it, and it talks a lot. It touches on a lot of topics, from climate, dwelling, housing and town planning, civic, commercial and industrial architecture, educational buildings, health, hygiene, hospitalization. But they don't only focus on what they did, but also what other architects designed in the tropical regions. And thankfully, this book doesn't only touch on one specific tropical area, but both areas, which is the dry zone and in the humid zone, where Amat is the humid zone, and that mostly applies for most countries around the sub-Saharan region. For North Africa and some parts of Asia, that would touch on the dry tropical zones. And so I would basically go through the book and just pick out a few things that I found interesting when I was reading through them. And you know, if you also get something from it, that's also fine. Um, One of the interesting things they first started with was climate, and it's actually important that we always look at climate when it comes to designing buildings. I remember back in architecture school, they sort of drilled it into our heads to always think about the climate when designing. Not only climate, but context and construction and all those things. They had a whole acronym for it, and it's actually interesting that they started with this first, but mainly it's a whole, lot of building science and weather science, I guess, but focusing on the temperatures difference between day and night and the temperature differences in the different zones. But at the same time, thinking about it now, that was then, but nowadays I'm thinking during the different seasons. For our season, during the dry and the rainy season, the temperature that they recorded during that time will be very different from the temperature that's recorded now. I'm sure it'll probably be higher from climate change and all that. But it's still worth noting that the design principles that need to be taken into consideration when designing for the tropical region still applies and still works. Sadly, we don't practice a lot of these methods that they have been able to, or they were able to create in order to mitigate the harsh weather conditions and the harsh climatic conditions that our zones produce on a natural basis. And so you can see here, this is the map of um, basically Africa and basically the tropical zone. So they're showing the rainfall pattern and the population in those zones over 500, and then 75 inches of rain in this particular zone. Sadly, it's in black and white, but you can tell a bit of the differences between um, the countries in certain particular places in Southern America and in Africa, some parts of Australia and Asia as well. Now they went deep into looking at the characteristics of warm and hot climates. So starting with warm, humid, then coming down to the temperature, the annual range, seasonal variations, the sky temperature, vapor pressure, sky conditions at various times. So it's cloudy, sky bright at other times, overcast with thinly overcast sky, all those things. Also taking into consideration the ground conditions. It's quite important to also take note of that because when I know when we are designing the the ground is quite important how the climate can affect it. You see, so if you know you're going to build in a place which has clay soil and has a lot of rain um, during the rainy season, and these days there's a whole lot of rain, right? You need to look at how that will affect the building you're going to put up there. Then they went through also the hot dry season, looking specifically at monsoon Sudan, whereas desert areas or semi-desert areas, those are maritime coastal areas as well. But also other countries, Malaysia, China, taking into consideration other things in it. And they look through a whole lot. The upper lands, the tropical inland, and as you can see here, hot arid regions and the main inlands and their specific locations. Also looking at the means by which people built in those areas. And this is from a house in Mali from the Dogon tribe in West Africa. Then they focus on the dwelling, right? The dwelling of the place. Then they noted here that now basically the book is on the architecture and the dry and humid zones. So it's not only they didn't lump it all together, but chose to split their findings and their writings on the two different zones. There were some similarities, but at other times there were a lot of differences that you could clearly tell that the factors to design for this region would differ from designing in this other region. How they looked at how to site the building, thinking about the sun, the position and the movement of the sun, where they said sun is a problem common to all tropics. This is true. Um, all roofs are exposed to the sun, but walls only in accordance with their orientation and the degree to which they are shaded by whatever means are open to the designers, right, in this section. And then in looking at the orientation of the dwellings, you have to consider which wall should receive the maximum sunlight and minimum sunlight during the day, the depth of the projections to protect the interior from the sun. So that will come in the form of different shading devices and whatnot that any designer and any architect should come up with. Then looking at the comfortable conditions in the humid tropics, uh, which would also then call for the movement of air currents and the movement of air, which is supplied by certain breezes and the direction. Depending on your area and your locality, you'd know where the wind blows from. If for us it would be the southwest winds, At other times in another season, it would be northeast winds, right? So designing, when I am designing and when I'm sure others too as well, they consider all these things in positioning the dwelling for um, the situation. Now, over here, they stated that basically general design. The difference between the humid and the dry tropics is, if anything, intensified in the design of the dwelling itself. And although there's less material to go on in the simple huts and shelters of tropical Africa, we should learn to draw sensible inferences from the past habits and styles of building in both tropical regions, which will help solve a lot of the current problems. This statement is actually quite profound for me because um, it's funny enough, it kind of speaks true to this very moment where people are building not of um, the habits or not of the situation on the ground, right? And they are stating that we should learn to draw inferences from the past habits and styles of building. If you look at if you remember the picture above, which showed the house in Mali, you know, they learned to build that way from years and years of living within that climatic zone and years of knowing how to site their dwellings by taking into consideration the air currents and sun position, how exactly to reduce the amount of heat that is coming in, and the building materials that are available to them, what exactly you can use. They had all those things or what was available to them and still were able to build comfortable dwellings. But now we have dwellings that basically are going off the rails. They're just taking a whole different direction. Yes, due to new materials that have been created, but those materials, let's say, are not all that good and play well in our locality. One would be concrete. It's a fantastic material to use, but if we do not know how to use it well and combine it with like making concrete blocks or concrete blocks, we are causing problems for ourselves internally where we have to then cool our buildings again using mechanical means, which we all know clearly almost every building, almost every dwelling has been doing it these days. Okay, and so we need to start looking at the past. I have to even like thinking about looking at all the means in which the people of the past were building the Shanti region in old Mali Empire, Niger. I mean, there are a lot of fantastic buildings that were created using the materials that were all around the people, and they work very well. Not forgetting even the northern area, like Sirigu, even Larabanga must comes to mind, which hopefully would still be conserved time and time again, because that building, as it stood the test of time, should not be left to rot and come to ruins. Over here, they talk about the roof. The roof of the house has greatest exposure to sun. Very true. And with that sun exposure comes a lot of heat. How do we reduce that heat that is coming into our buildings and that's being transmitted through the material? I have not lived in a house, a dwelling with a thatch roof, but I'm sure with the way they stacked it on top of each other, they, using the raw material and the straw and whatever it was that they used, they were able to reduce the amount of heat that was being created, right? The roof is a very important thing. that sometimes we forget and just use the base material, be it concrete, on which is, if maybe you don't insulate the concrete, and if you use maybe a roofing sheet, let's go with any normal aluminum sheet with no insulation, the amount of heat that gets trapped inside the roof before then being transmitted into the spaces within, the dwelling, creates a very uncomfortable environment that you then have to cool the building by any means necessary. If you had proper natural ventilation and that was enough, that would be good. But then if your windows were not designed to properly ventilate the spaces, then you have to depend on electric fan, even with an air conditioning system, depending on the system and how powerful a system you design or rather buy to cool the space. They looked at the double roof, system where it's ventilated in various forms. So now by methods of sound protection by air gaps. So they created the double roof system with air gaps, right, where the main roof that is exposed to the sun is lifted off the main structure of the building. This first one is held by truss. This one looks like a concrete flat roof, and still has that air gap to be able to allow air pass through and reduce the amount of heat that comes down. This is basically an inclined. This one is basically an inclined roof, right? And still has air gaps in various forms. One here and then one here as well. Now let's look at walls and openings in the dwelling. Here they looked at the orientation, being mindful of the orientation of a house, making sure it's almost free from direct sunlight, and because they say that protection from the sun costs money. This is like almost basic architecture 101 or climate 101, whatever the course was, in designing buildings. Try to reduce the amount of openings in the building facade that is exposed mainly to the sun at peak periods and also at other times, right? So for us, it would be the west and the east facades, and this is clearly seen in a lot of buildings pre-independence time and post-independence time, also in colonial times as well. So I guess that's still pre-independence time, but um let's see, off the top of my head, Unity Hall in Kumasi, some office buildings, administration block in Unilag, um, and some buildings in um, Unilag as well. Staff clubhouse, KNUST again. They have a sort of system to have zero openings on the west and east facade. Where else? Where else? Where else? Ooh. I mean, if you remember some, sure you can. You know what they are. I can't seem to remember some for now, but these were how most of the designs were built. If okay, yeah, these are how two most of these buildings were designed and built to reduce access or the entry of the sunlight from the west and east sides. Now, the remaining walls were designed in such a way to allow as much light as possible, but still to reduce the the intensity of it. And so, with that, they can have sun protection in various forms by creating shading. With this flat roof, you have shade to cut down the heat from the sun, but still light will be able to penetrate through the spaces. And you have overhangs from a normal sloped roof. This has the same thing as well. And this house in Tesano, Lagos, Nigeria, by Kenneth Scott Associates, does an amazing job of shading with the concrete roof. So shading here plays a huge role, and you can clearly tell that they've they've focused all their openings on the longest axis of the house. So I'm guessing this is the north south, um, either the north or southern axis of the building, and then the east and west sides have purely blank walls with no openings. Right, and this is the Eastman house, again by Kenneth Scott Associates. It would be nice to see if it's still there. I hope it's still there. Right, so again, look at the application of wood louvers and to also create that same shading effect or overhang shading effect, and instead of using a solid um, material, is actually louvers in three pieces to cut down that direction line, and then a vertical one as well in this picture here, right? And that does the job at so many angles, from the left side, from a low angle, and then also from direct, let's say 0 degrees from at midday, or at the peak period from 11 to between 1 p.m. or so. Same thing applied in this building over here. Then the ground treatment. Sometimes we forget this thing. Ground treatment. No, let me not say sometimes we forget these things. We never forgot ground treatment, but now in this current era, and let me mention Nigeria, Ghana, probably Kenya. I'm not sure, I don't see a lot of their buildings there, but there are a lot of videos, pictures, images from developers or even single individuals who have managed to build houses. It's a huge task to build a house, right? Or to build any dwelling. And it's a feat that needs congratulations, because it takes a lot of resources and energy to be able to pull that off. But then you make it harder when you don't think of the ground, right? And over here, you can clearly see they're stating that air heated by sun, it's still coming into the house. So now, if there are no ground treatments, the light, everything is the radiation just moves calmly into the house and will cook you for God knows how long. It will cook you, and you'll probably be, should I say, mincemeat or a good turkey, however that goes, right? You need to be able to treat the ground. So those who do not employ professionals to do those design choices for them, or who decide to go against the design choice made by the design professional that we should treat the ground, do some external works to be able to reduce um, the amount of heat that's going to enter the dwelling. But not only that, to also make the place nice. Mainly, most people would say, or I'm guessing most people would say, it's just to make the compound nice, right? But there's another layer to it. It's not only about the beauty of whatever you see, but it's about the reducing the amount of heat that's going to come into your yard, right? Remember, some people would say their grandparent house, or houses in the villages, or wherever it is, with lawns and some form of ground cover, had cooler, like the places were quite cool and everything. But where they are living now, there's a lot of heat. Okay, and so with that heat comes the problem of being very uncomfortable during the day and even at night, because there's still heat being distributed from the walls of the house, which some of the heat is trapped during the day and then is released at night. So no matter what, you're experiencing heat from 6 a.m. to 11:59 p.m., which is very bad, right? And ground cover or ground treatment would play a part in reducing the amount of heat that you feel and feel uncomfortable. So over here stating that air cooled through vegetation. You can clearly tell what the image is showing. The heat, amount of heat that is going to be transmitted into the house has been reduced just because of the vegetation one close to it and not even far from it. So there's a second layer to this, where it's not only that there's vegetation around the compound, but it's very close to the building as well, right? So that any sort of solar radiation or sun rays that are coming um, to the building and will be transmitted in any way, whether horizontally, vertically, diagonally, or in terms of reflection or whatever way it is, would be reduced by the ground treatment. And so if there was an overhang for this building as well, clearly the amount of heat would then be cut down as well. Okay, and so the occupants will be very, very comfortable without thinking about how they would cool up their spaces. Okay, so you see a lot of ground cover here. There's a courtyard in this picture with a tree that has a huge canopy with a lot of vegetation around it, creating a very cool environment. Same with this building as well, and this one in Mexico City by these architects. This house also is in Lagos, southern Nigeria, designed by Fry Drew and Partners. And so clearly they are practicing what they preach, or rather they've practiced and now they are preaching in this book. Then they talk about ventilation, ventilating the space, looking at so many ways to ventilate the space. One particular thing that was interesting for me was the high pressure area pile up of air, and there needs to be a way of not blocking that air from coming into the home. And so sometimes, looking at how you situate the dwelling, you need to do it such a way that you allow in air. Okay, but there are so many ways to do that because there are other factors that come into play. And now these images show dwelling during rain and hurricanes. This is moderate rains and showers, light air. So you can see the gradation from a very closed opening, semi-closed opening, fully open, sliding partition. Then during the night hours, sleep, and also works for privacy as well. Now the topmost part for sleep and then the bottom part has been fully covered, but privacy wise, the top part, it could be the fan light or the clerestory windows, those are open, and so there's still a bit of um, air and ventilation entering the space, even though people will not be to see them because of the screen that has been designed at the large bottom area. Other forms of um, you know ventilating spaces and still having that privacy was through using the precast concrete blocks, or perforated walls that we now that we've seen, and hopefully people get to pick them up again. There are other countries that are using them quite efficiently, like in Vietnam and some Asian, um, Southern Asian countries, India as well. And so we need to be able to pick some of these things back up. Because I remember back in the 80s, there were a lot of walls, a lot of perforated walls, right, in front of verandas and whatnot, and even for fence wall as well. There were some houses that they build a solid block wall up to a certain point, and then do perforated concrete blocks or precast concrete blocks with vents or holes with designs in them, just to still allow air and to still be able to see outside the compound or whatnot, right? But nowadays, if moving away from maybe just the using as a fence wall, most of the fence walls are now just full on solid walls, and some even go as high as 3 meters and 3.2 meters and whatnot. And it's a lot. I get it. Everybody needs their privacy, but what about the air that you are blocking from coming into your compound? And if you continue to do that, these days, there are a lot of um, lands that are being bought in smaller size. So you're buying a quarter plot, half plot, and all that. And when you have those small sized plots, you are forced to build as close to the fence wall or as close to the side boundary as possible. And when you build to the close to the side boundary and you still have a solid wall that goes very high, you're reducing the amount of air that's going to come into the building, and that is going to be a major problem. Sure, you can always ventilate, or you can always use AC and whatnot, but we need to, as they say, go back to the way we used to, or the way people used to design to be able to have good and comfortable spaces. And that is one thing that tropical architecture is all about, to design for the specific place and specific time for a number of years. Okay, so mosquito screening. Oof, that's a problem. That's a problem. You know what? I've been thinking that we should use less mosquito screens, less mesh for our windows. Definitely people will be against that. But I'm also of the view that if you take care of your environment well, there will be no need for mosquito screens. And um, I think that holds true. But at the same time, yes, malaria and other diseases and whatnot and all that kind of thing. But also take note that the um, malaria, what was it? What was it? The malaria cases, or even the deaths of malaria, have reduced in this country for is reduced drastically, because I think what was the statistic? It was about 2,000 and above 15 years ago every year, and now it's about 100 and something. It's a huge drop, and that's good. The Mainly the campaigns, the news reports, the education that has been going on around for so many years, using mosquito netting, having mosquito screens in your windows, and also the raid adverts, the coils, using mosquito coils when going to sleep, all that. Very helpful, very useful. Hopefully, we can get to a point where we may not need no mosquito screens or mosquito bed nets. Okay, and when that happens, surely I think we can stop using a mosquito screen. But Fry and Drew talk about mosquito screens, and it's very important because in the tropics we have, actually in the humid zones, we have that issue so much. mosquitoes love the tropical regions. They can't survive almost anywhere else, right? And they mostly come in during the night. So here's the saying: night air brings in mosquitoes, right? Um, House lights attract flies and insects. Even during the day, you always see flies. So the day brings in flies, the night brings in mosquitoes. I don't remember seeing a housefly at night. Have you seen a housefly at night? I don't know, right? And so you wouldn't want to have these insects in your home for even a short period of time. They are very annoying to be around, and they are basically pests that need to be gotten rid of, right? And so this is where the screens come in because they keep them out during the day and during the night. The outside night is always cool. It will be fun. It will be good to not have the screen. But they said that even though they protect, let's take the night, even though they protect us from mosquitoes and reduce the amount of diseases that we may get, the mosquito netting also reduces the amount of air that is able to come into the dwelling, into any building that is used. So it has a positive side and a negative side, and I think we should still be able to we should protect ourselves, but if there comes a time where we need to, stop using mosquito screens to then allow in a lot of air come through our windows. Especially now that most people are using a sliding window, that would be very, very great. But still, for now, let's still keep using it. The mosquito screens and all that. Although there are some buildings that don't have mosquito screens, so I would like to try and stay in one of them and see how it goes. And then I'll know if my notion that mosquito screens should be abolished totally would work out. And so if anybody has a house there, kindly invite me to and host me for at least 1 or 2 nights, right? Then daylighting. Talked about daylighting, right? We've spoken a bit about it, reducing it through shading devices, but still allowing a lot in. Then the rain as well. Same method of protecting yourself against the rain, overhangs and all that. Different forms of it. They have pivoted wall section and canopies and all that. Pest control. This basically talk about how to the things or the pests that normally would affect us during the house. These days, they mostly focus on a bit of wood, because we used to build a lot of wood, so termites and cockroaches in kitchens. But now, if you're able to keep a clean, tidy place, and even if you use wood in the homes, which most people do not use these days, but if they are treated well, you get less termites. But definitely, after a number of years, termites will start to evade the wood, and so they'll need to be removed and replaced. Then looking at the kitchen and the design of it. Tropical kitchen has so many aspects to it. You cannot really have a kitchen in the tropics and let it be very enclosed. One, because of the the cooking and the work that goes on in there, right? Those days we used to cook with fire, wood, all that. It's a lot of smoke, and so you cannot really have the kitchen indoors. This one has a bit of it indoors, but it still has an exterior one to have that same access. Bedrooms, spoke on furniture, bathrooms, um, considering all that. And then this storage, clothes in storage. They said so. They said clothes attacked by moths and um, fungus in the rainy season, very difficult to remove, right? So cupboard should should be open, right, and have no dark and inaccessible corners, and should be ventilated at the top and the bottom. I was wondering how cupboards are first when I'm reading this are supposed to be ventilated. Actually, they have a diagram here. Ventilated at the bottom, so air comes in and then air goes out. And when that happens, you do not have to air out your clothes, or you don't have clothes that are, what was the word for it? Funky, I guess. Clothes that are funky, and then you have to change, remove them, and wash them, and all that. Reduces a lot of work in the future. And so I'm thinking we should consider going back to this, ventilating, having ventilated cupboards and wardrobes. Just makes the whole work easier, right? Because then I don't have to, after our 6 months of or a year, you've forgotten some clothes in your closet or your wardrobe, and then you're like, huh, this is still here. Doesn't smell good or anything. And so let me just remove it, wash it, put it back. The whole cycle repeats again. You forget about the clothes, and again, starts all over. I'm going to skip ahead. Housing and town plan. I think for this chapter there was a lot I took from this. Mainly also because most of the housing designs they showed came from a few architects, and but they were mostly also designs in Ghana as well, right? And Chandigarh, India. And looked at how housing should really be planned. Okay, let me go up. Where was it? Where was it? Let's go from housing by central agencies. Yeah, warehouses built by central agencies, the low cost can be met by only by rigorous standardization, expert management, and skillful planning that secures livable conditions at the necessarily high densities. Right. Rigorous standardization if you want housing at low cost. And that's what governments should, I think, try and focus on. Right? You say you want to create affordable housing, or there's a housing deficit in the country. So things need to be standardized. We can try as much as possible, but time and time again, things go up, the cost rise. I don't know what's happening with the cost of the project that is skyrocketing and is so not affordable, like this one in Ashanti region, where it was an affordable housing project. Now, luckily, it's been built after so many years, and it's time to sell the houses or the apartments, and the people can't afford it because it's not affordable. So maybe there's no standardization happening, or it wasn't done properly, or different factors. I don't know what it is, but I think if we had sort of like a model dwelling, a model house that can easily be replicated, that doesn't have much fancy things inside, and still provides the basic needs of the people who are likely going to live inside, with a good enough layout, that would really help the situation that we have at hand and build more houses. I mean, look at the planning of Tema and also the planning of the houses and dwellings that were there. You know, there's a lot of houses that were done and were done very well. Although nowadays, if you go, you know, there's no much to do because it's, I'll say, I mean, since the last time I saw one and been in one, it might have likely outgrown its uses. mainly because now there are a lot of people living in maybe one 2 bedroom house which was meant for 4 people, and now they're like six or so. And so it's a bit big for them, and they've retouched on the spaces to create more space for themselves, destroying a bit of the history of it. But I get it. If there's no space, there's no space, and that's what we can afford. Social and economic survey checklist. This was one of the interesting things I chanced upon in this and Swiss Create. The fact that Swiss Create was created and used in Ghana, in Kumasi, I think somewhere else. If you type Swiss Create, I think it's similar to uh, compressed earth blocks or compressed earth bricks. So I mean, old name, new name, same old, same old. Now, this checklist that I want to talk about, number one, type of person to be housed. You have to look at the type of person to be housed, their living habits, possibility of change, and the rate at which it is taking place. Now, this kind of reminds me of the things to look out for when designing. They've termed it as a social and economic survey checklist for housing and town planning, but I think it can also be applied in the individual sense for single houses and also for other types of projects, right? And so look at the people's habits and what really can change in the future. And that's why you go to architects, that's why you go to designers to look at what exactly can be done for you, not only now but also later on. Then look at the income groups and the liability to change. What provisions do you need to make for the future for the users, the class of people, the groupings, occupation, look at their religion. So the social aspects come and factor in here. Then the cost of the house relative to possible economic rent, any subsidies, allowances for maintenance, rent, interest, and the size of the family, and the cost of material. Over here, the cost of the material always plays a part in building. Forget the first five. This last one can make or break the project in so many ways. In so many ways. And it's quite annoying because then when that happens, people can't really build. I mean, African Building Hub says if you want to build your house, I wish I knew his name though, but the account is African Building Hub, and says if you want to build your house, build now, start small. It's actually not a bad thing, and he knows or they know how expensive it is to build in the country and other parts of the world. And so when you start little by little, you should be able to do it because of the cost of materials, and also maybe our methods of construction. And it could also be that if we had a standard, if we could use maybe a standard module of building, people can be able to build their houses even though they might not have it to their personal taste, right? But maybe a few tweaks can be done. Imagine if architects created certain modules that they can sell actually, right? So somebody wants to build a house, simple house, an architect has a housing module, right? They buy it and then they can make some few additions and subtractions to it to get what they want. Then they can have the drawings produced and then get their permit and build. In this regard, it works out that it's instead of one house to one, it becomes one to many. But you have different buildings. It's not such a bad idea. I wonder how it will work. Um, I don't think about copyright, but of course, copyright will still stay with the architect. But then a lot of people can be able to afford to build a house without thinking of one, how much it will cost to pay the architect, because then the price of the building will be subsidized for them, because then if there's mass purchasing, there's no need to have the cost of the design to be so high. And that also cuts down on having shoddy designs being done for simple folk, or for any normal folk who want to build, and they can't actually, one, afford an architect, and two, are in a hurry to build. Once they can buy a design that is for this tropical region and for certain localities, bear in mind that they'll have to do maybe geotechnical investigation and all that. So a whole lot of things, climate and all those things, to be factored in. That means the sites and site conditions. It would really work for a lot of people who are looking for simple buildings to design and then live in, and finally have a place to call home. So it's not a bad idea though. I'm sure I heard it from somewhere. Yeah. And they also provided a checklist on urban housing layout design for the humid tropics. Ask questions like, is the majority of the housing, like, is it going to be air conditioned, and so should it be arranged to where a breeze is maintained? And then for the dry tropics, the same question, where they are not going to be air conditioned, but it should it be arranged in such a way that it is in the group and protected from prevailing dust storms. So you see how the humid tropics and the dry tropics would differ when it comes to not having air conditioning, and how the individual houses in the urban housing layout should be arranged. Other things can come into play. How is the housing arranged that the midday sun follows the length of the rooftops, roads and pedestrian access, make provisions for future expansions. So just like what I was saying, the houses in Tema, if I think they designed it, if there was a way, maybe there is a way, if there was a way that was designed for future expansion, and if it was also made available to those who live or who purchased it, and even to later occupants in case maybe it was sold off, then people who are living, people with large families who are living, like, let's say, the 2 bedroom house and whatnot, can be able to make their own expansion of the place, just like what Elemental did for their affordable housing. What's his name? But the principal architect of Elemental was a great project. Definitely good that I won him the Pritzker Prize. So more checklists here, where housing is of inflammable material. See that inflections are provided where required, such as at end of streets and junctions, vehicular routes, you know. So I think this is it. So here, low cost housing in Ghana. I think this one is in Tema, if I'm not wrong. I think this is the one I was talking about, right? So make all those other provisions. Village housing checklist. Do we have villages? Yeah, we do, but like most of the housing and urban houses are not going to be done in villages. But also there's a checklist for low income housing. This is quite essential. I think we would do well to have this in mind, right? So we look at house accommodation, number and size of living rooms. Let me just go through the main things. So checklist for low income housing: number and size of living rooms, clothes cupboards, foundations, doors and windows, where to talk about wood, metal, reinforced concrete or composite materials. What's the purpose required? Is it going to be standardized over what and the number of units? So what is the number of units what's the cost and durability, and a whole lot of things. Consider high windows on certain walls in combination with low louver ventilation. So squarely, they are recommending louver ventilation, louver windows for your openings, right? Your operable openings. Cast concrete or metal protection for general security. Choice of fasteners, blocks, bat hinge, whatever it is. And look at your door hardware and ironmongery as well. Then that's mainly for the house and accommodation. Then the kitchen, I'm assuming here the kitchen is separate from the main house. Should cooking be on the veranda or in an enclosed kitchen? So traditional method of cooking on wood versus electricity or any other form of cooking that anybody might want to partake in. So look at the type of flue to cook with, and also prevention of smoke if needed. So a hood or a cow drought, and storage, facility, storage of utensils, crockery, cutlery, pest protection, storage of food, lighting of the kitchen, drainage as well. Then the wash space, covered or uncovered, with door or screen wall only, position of shower point, type of shower nozzle, seat hook for clothes, lighting, shared with WC or not, or kitchen, finish of the walls, floor mirror. It's a whole lot. I think I will try and, but you can see here. So let me just go back up in case you need it, and then you can take it up. Cast concrete, all here and all here as well. It's a very good book. Yeah. So WC, waterborne, washing. How is the family clothes going to be washed? If there's a bicycle, how is it going to be stored? Veranda. Which room to protect? How deep? For family groupings, is the veranda going to be used with the kitchen? So it's going to be like a working veranda, or it's going to be a social veranda. Two different uses of the veranda. And the structural elements, think about the roof, the walls, the choice of wood, the roof load, what's going to carry. In this day and age, you probably think of your satellite dish, solar panels, if you are going to put solar panels. And if you are a structural engineer or an architect who works with one, that would all and should be taken care of. Then again, if you know you're going to use solar panels in the future, you just mention it and then it should be fine. Yeah, that's a whole lot. Then different forms of planning of different housing layouts. This is a town. Okay. I'm going to skip ahead again. Went too far. Oh, and then they come to civic, commercial, and industrial architecture. It's not really most of my focus over here for this book, but same principles apply from climate, dwelling, ventilation, housing layout, and everything. But they just speak on or write on, different civic buildings that were designed. This is a very interesting one. Let me see. I think this is the library. So this is a beach restaurant in Cuba. Then a bank at Takrady, done by Fry and Drew. Also, Police Training College Accra, done by Kenneth Scott's associate. So you can see the elements, the tropical elements that were being applied here: shading device, large overhangs, with a veranda there. So I'm sure there's also an opening there as well. Elevated to some point here. Similar thing, nearly blank, short axis of the building. So I'm sure this is facing the east and west, with the spiral staircase leading to the upper floors. Sort of great buildings. This by Palace of Justice, Chandigarh, India, Le Corbusier. Then educational buildings, how they should be designed, patio classroom, simple layout, used something similar like this. But now, if you're unlucky, you see some classrooms are not designed very well. So if you're looking to have or design classrooms for, let's say, people in need, now there are a lot of children who are studying under trees that need properly designed classrooms, and so having this would make it much easier because then we can have a simple structure. um, let's just say they have certain things that they've listed that should really go when it comes to an educational building. And let me just say, so watertight non-corroding roof, and only for the tropics, because there's not much money to build an elaborate building. Roof supports of impermeable material, whichever one works. You have your pitched or gable roof overhang, a single slope roof, elevated single slope roof with a shade around it. And you see here also should lead to a system. So they say collect water as much as possible. Floor should be impermeable. You've seen all those classrooms that have come to ruin and their floors are basically destroyed and basically turned into sand. And so the students also do not have desks and then are either sitting on the floor bare but their clothes being dirty. My god, it's sad, but like, yeah. So yeah, if we are looking to design primary schools, think about it: latrine of an acceptable type, acceptable, borehole or water septic. Also consider ventilation one side to the other, not just only at one side. Shading if and when needed. But I think an overhang, depending on how large overhang is, should work out as well. Mm, Butterfly, yep, University, Kumasi Technical College. I think this is now part of the College of Engineering for, I don't know what lab is this, but engineering laboratory. There's a lot of huge machines there as well. I'm gonna skip ahead as well. Shoot. Also, yeah, so last chapter, health, hygiene, hospitalization. Yeah, I'll just scroll through this quickly. Not much to say. Consider the health of the people, insect control, refuse and garbage, because it's a place of healing and not a place of death. Although, that also happens sometimes, but it's part of the cycle of life. So, health centers and clinics. This is a small rural healthcare center. You can clearly see the movement of the people when they come, waiting, dispensary, nurse, doctor, treatment. It's just a simple layout. One consulting room, treatment, a drugstore, clerk, general storage, tank for water, then a yard behind. Layout of hospitals, tropic region. This layout made me really understand how Ajay Associates designed the district, is it Agenda 111 hospitals. I didn't quite get why the hospital layout was like that. 'Cause I was thinking, oh, they should be more modern. But yeah, even then, thinking back then, it was more like, okay, because for they're going to be located in different districts, and where it's not really of an urban setting, most of them, and so it needs to be as simple as possible. It makes sense. And then late seeing this years later, I'm like, yeah, that was really not a bad design at all, because it just makes it simple. um and when you follow the process, even from the small health center, it just goes together with it. So I'm even thinking, maybe did they have this as well and use it, and just plan those 111 hospitals accordingly. Hopefully one or a few of them are finished, and we can go see how it works all together. Fingers crossed. Yeah, so basically that's the end. Comes with appendices and uh, a whole lot of research and all that. Look at, it's a whole bunch. So great book altogether. Amazing detail. You hardly see this these days, but yeah, it's a great detail. Earthquake resistant structures and all that types of the protection of buildings against lightning. You have your lightning rod, blah 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 blah. So yeah, good book. I think it would be really helpful. I mean, for me, if I'm designing like a lot of housing, a lot of single houses, multi urban houses, low cost housing, and all that. But not only that, but like different buildings as well. We need to start, or I need to start thinking about the past influences from the people who spent years discovering ways to actually build buildings that work for them, and which worked for the tropical region they were in as well. And so knowing about the dry, even though I'm not the dry, was also good as well. Because if the when the time comes, and you know I need to do that as well, it would be great to be well informed about how to design for people like that. So yeah, I think this is basically me running through tropical architecture. It's a weird thing to do, but I hope you found, I guess, a bit of knowledge from me as I did. Um, and you can also find this book elsewhere, or can set up a way to also get it to you. But like, yeah, it's a great book. If you're not in the tropics, you should try and get it and read it as well, because it has a lot of information that will just make it easier to design certain buildings. I mean, they didn't go through a lot, and I don't think at that time there was a lot of buildings, but yeah, this was good. This is good for a certain number of buildings, institutional, health facilities, so civic, wherever it is. You know, they didn't need to touch on churches and all those things, but like office as well, it can work. So educational buildings will be touched on it, right? And so that's it for now. Hopefully, we you see me again on another review of something related to architecture. Right, right, later.